Harriet Brantwell reached the front door before the housekeeper could, because she recognized the crest on the carriage before she recognized the danger it carried. It was scarcely 7. The knocker had barely finished its second strike when she pulled the door open herself, still in her plain morning wool, her hair unpinned, and found a duke standing on the step, unslept and unconcerned with who saw it. She knew the crest. Everyone in Mayfair knew the crest. Why the Duke of Halworth had come to collect a debt in person, when lesser men sent solicitors for far smaller sums, was the part she could not yet answer.
Miss Brantwell, I believe you already understand why I'm here.
She held her ground instead of stepping back to let him in. That later, she would count as the first true thing she did that morning. The small, useless defiance of making a duke stand on cold stone a moment longer than he expected to.
My father plays cards badly and drinks worse. If he owes you money, your grace, I can offer you the household silver and very little else.
He did not stake money last night. He staked you.
The words landed the way cold water does, without warning and without mercy. Harriet had spent 3 days telling herself that whatever her father had done at the tables could be mended, the way every other disaster of the last 2 years had eventually been mended, by selling something, by writing a careful letter, by waiting. This was a different order of disaster. Behind her, somewhere on the stairs, she heard the particular creak that meant her father was awake and had yet to find the courage to come down. She had heard that creak before, always at the worst hours, always followed by silence instead of footsteps.
You cannot mean that literally.
I mean it as plainly as a man can mean anything. Your father wagered his final hand of the night on the belief that no duke would ever actually collect a woman as payment of a debt. He lost the hand. I have come to prove him wrong about the second part, if not the first.
No cruelty colored how he said it. That, in its own way, made it worse than cruelty would have. Cruelty could be answered. Flatness could not.
Then tell me what you intend to do with me, your grace, and I will decide how frightened to be.
I have no intention of telling you that today.
He said it the way he might have refused a second cup of tea and turned to instruct his coachman about the trunk that had yet to be packed, as though the matter of her entire future were already settled and only the luggage remained in question. Edmund Brantwell came down at last while the trunk was being carried out, still in his shirt sleeves, his eyes red-rimmed from a night that had included no sleep at all. He looked past Frederick to his daughter, opened his mouth, and found that a year of small failures had left him nothing worth saying.
You do not need to explain it to me, Papa. I have seen the ledgers. I have known for months that this house was standing on borrowed time. I only wish you had told me you meant to stake the last thing in it that was not yours to lose.
He flinched at that, which was the nearest thing to an apology he managed before the door closed between them. Harriet had managed her father's household accounts in secret for 11 months, ever since she found the first unpaid tradesman's bill hidden inside a book he never read. In that time she had learned the exact difference between a man who could be reasoned with and a man who could not. The Duke of Halworth, standing on her doorstep at 7 in the morning with a debt he refused to explain, belonged to the second category.
I'm not a trunk, your grace. I do not go where I'm sent without being told why.
No. You are considerably more trouble than a trunk. I noticed that within the first minute of meeting you, which is longer than it took me to notice most things last night.
It was not quite an apology, nor quite anything Harriet could name. But something in it kept her from slamming the door, and within the hour she was seated across from him in a carriage bound for Surrey, the London streets narrowing behind them into hedgerows and bare winter fields. She spent the first mile in silence, watching him watch the passing countryside as though it required his full attention. She spent the second mile deciding she would not be the one to break first.
You have not asked me a single question since we left London. Most men in your position would want to know what sort of woman they had just acquired.
I claim no such acquisition. I removed you from a worse one. There is a difference, whatever it looks like from where you're sitting.
From where I am sitting, your grace, the difference is very hard to see.
He had no answer for that, or chose to give none, and the rest of the journey passed in a silence Harriet found, against her own better judgment, less uncomfortable than she expected a duke's silence to be. London was already behind them for good, whatever Harriet decided to feel about that. Tell me in the comments what city you're listening from tonight, before we go on. Halworth House looked nothing like a prison, which unsettled Harriet more than iron bars would have. It rose out of bare winter parkland with more windows lit than any house she had ever lived in. A housekeeper named Mrs. Averill met the carriage in the drive with a manner too warm to belong to a jailer. Mrs. Averill showed her to rooms of her own with a fire already lit, and a wardrobe half filled with gowns that fit as though someone had guessed her measurements to the inch. When Harriet asked who had ordered them made, the housekeeper said only that instructions had come down a fortnight ago, long before any hand of cards had been dealt.
A fortnight. He knew, then before the game was ever played, that my father might lose more than money.
Mrs. Averill said, with some care, that she could not speak to what his grace had known, but that in 11 years of service she had never once seen him waste an order on a thing he did not mean to use. No lock on Harriet's door worked from the outside. No guard stood watch in the corridor. When she asked Mrs. Averill, later that first evening, whether she was a guest of the house or a prisoner in it, the older woman said only that his grace had given no instruction either way, only that Miss Brantwell was to want for nothing. Dinner that first night was a formal, careful thing, the two of them seated at a table built for 20, with enough silence between courses that Harriet found herself counting the candles rather than meet his eyes. It was Frederick, against all expectation, who broke it.
You need not fear my staff. Mrs. Averill has run this house since before I inherited it, and she will tell you whatever I am too proud to say myself.
That sounds like a confession that there is a great deal you're too proud to say.
It is not pride, Miss Brantwell. Whatever you decide it is not that.
He offered nothing further, and she chose, for that first night, not to press him, though she noted, filing it away with the same careful attention she had once given her father's tradesmen's bills, that a man so quick to deny pride rarely denied it without reason. The next morning, unable to sit still in rooms that still felt borrowed rather than her own, Harriet found her way out to the frozen garden and discovered Frederick already there, examining a rose bed gone brittle with frost as though it required a duke's personal supervision to survive the winter.
Do you always rise before the sun, your grace, or only when you have a debt to inspect?
I have never slept well in this house. My father built the east wing for a wife who died before he finished it, and I have never quite decided whether that makes the mornings here mournful or merely honest.
It was the first unguarded thing he had told her that carried no weight of obligation, and Harriet found herself, against her own will, wanting to hear another.
You speak of your father the way I speak of mine. As a cautionary tale, one keeps meaning to stop repeating.
My father gambled nothing away. He loved too carefully to survive losing what he loved. I have spent a good many years telling myself I inherited the title and none of the rest of him.
And have you?
He gave her no direct answer, only turned back to the frost-blackened roses with a concentration that told Harriet she had asked one question too close to the bone, and for once she let the silence stand, satisfied that she had at least made him flinch. That same afternoon, restless in rooms too fine to feel like her own, Harriet asked Mrs. Averill whether the house steward might spare an hour of his ledgers, claiming only that she preferred occupation to idleness. The steward, bemused, obliged her, and Harriet spent the better part of 2 hours reconciling a column of tenant rents that had gone unbalanced for a year, correcting 3 small errors before returning the book with no explanation beyond a request that he check her arithmetic himself. He checked it and found nothing to correct, and told Mrs. Averill, within the week, that Miss Brantwell had a sharper eye for figures than any clerk he had employed in a decade, a fact that reached Frederick's ears before Harriet ever thought to mention it herself. 2 days later, in the West Corridor, she found him standing before a portrait she had not been given permission to study. A young officer in regimentals looked out from the canvas with Frederick's own dark eyes and none of his stillness, his mouth caught mid-laugh by a painter who had been fond of him, that much was plain in every brushstroke.
Your brother.
My brother, Robert, He sat for that the spring before he took his commission and complained the entire time that the artist made him look too solemn for a man who laughed as often as he did.
It was the most Frederick had said to her without being asked twice, and Harriet chose for once not to push further. She had learned, managing her father's ruin in silence for close to a year, that some doors opened faster when no one rattled the handle. The following afternoon, while lacing Harriet into a gown for dinner, the housemaid Nell remarked, without any particular weight, that it was strange, wasn't it, that the name Brantwell had come to this house at all, given everything that had happened to the young captain who used to visit before the war.
What captain? What visits?
Nell's hands stilled on the laces, and her face closed the way faces do when a servant realizes she has said one sentence too many. She murmured that it was not her place, and that if Harriet wanted the whole of it, she had best ask his grace himself, and not a housemaid who talked more than she ought. Harriet asked him that very evening, over a soup she barely tasted. He set his spoon down with visible care, as though the small, ordinary motion required more control than usual. He told her only that it was not the right night for that conversation, and that he hoped she would trust him a little longer before demanding the rest of it. Trust, she found, was another matter, but she noticed, watching him across the candlelight, that he looked at her the way a man looks at something he already expects to lose, and that noticing frightened her more than his silence did. One concession, at least, he gave her that same evening. When she pressed him on whether Silas Corbin, the name her father had whispered once, drunk and afraid, before locking himself in his study for 2 days, had any true claim on her at all, his jaw tightened. It told her more than his answer did.
Corbin would not have brought you here. He would have taken you somewhere considerably less comfortable and called it a kindness the entire time. That is the only part of this I am willing to promise you tonight.
It fell short of the whole truth. Harriet understood that much even as she took it, the way a starving woman understands that half a loaf is not a feast, and eats it anyway. She could not sleep that night, and neither, it seemed, could he. Past midnight, unable to lie still with a stranger's name turning over in her mind, Harriet took a candle down to the library, meaning only to find something dull enough to read herself to exhaustion. Frederick was already there, a letter open on the desk in front of him that he failed to fold away in time. Harriet caught the signature before he could hide it. Julian Brantwell.
That is my brother's hand.
Frederick did not deny it. For a long moment he only looked at her, and something in his controlled, unreadable face came apart at the seam, the way a well-made coat gives it a single stitch under enough weight.
Your brother wrote to mine every month for 2 years. I have read every letter in this desk a dozen times. I still do not know how to say what I owe your family, so I have chosen badly not to say it at all.
He stopped himself there. The way a man stops before stepping off a ledge he has only just noticed. Harriet crossed to the desk and looked down at the letter without touching it, at Julian's familiar careless hand describing some small ordinary joke about army rations that had nothing to do with the weight the paper now carried.
He never wrote to me about Robert. Not once. I did not even know your brother's name until I saw that portrait.
Perhaps he did not want you to carry a friendship he could not promise would last. Soldiers guard the people at home that way sometimes?
Harriet chose not to press him further that night. She sat instead in the chair across from him, in silence, until the candle burned low, and something between them shifted without either of them naming it aloud. The shift found its way into public view soon enough. 4 days later, Frederick brought her to an assembly at Lady Marrow's townhouse. A public appearance meant, he said, to settle the gossip already circling London about a duke's mysterious new houseguest before it curdled into something worse than gossip. London had already decided what to think of her before she arrived. Harriet felt it in the pause that rippled through the ballroom when Frederick led her in. She felt it too in the fans that rose half an inch too quickly to hide the whispers behind them. In the particular way 3 matrons near the punch table stopped speaking and stared. Frederick led her onto the floor before the whispering could harden into anything worse, the formal distance of the dance, hands touching only where the steps required it. A careful span of space between them that the pattern closed and opened again did nothing to help. It did nothing, in fact, to quiet the awareness that had been building between them for a fortnight.
You dance the way you speak, Your Grace, as though every motion has already been decided in advance and nothing is left to chance.
I find that chance has already cost me a great deal this month. I'm not eager to invite more of it onto a ballroom floor.
The steps turned them apart and brought them back together before she could answer. And when they came close again, close enough that she could see the tightness at the corner of his mouth had not eased since they arrived, Harriet spoke without quite deciding to.
You are not dancing for the room's benefit at all, are you? You are watching the door.
I have been watching the door since we arrived. I would rather you had not noticed I was failing to hide it.
It settled nothing. Silas Corbin was there before them, a slight, soft-spoken man whose smile never once reached his eyes, and he crossed the ballroom floor toward Harriet as though he had been waiting all evening for this very entrance. Corbin's voice, when he spoke, carried just far enough for the nearest dancers to hear, and no farther a man who had long since learned the exact volume of public ruin. He informed the room in tones of great and false regret that the debt Edmund Brantwell owed him predated any card game played at Halworth's table, and that a duke's late entrance to a private matter did not erase a prior claim. Frederick's hand found the small of Harriet's back, not to claim her, but to steady her, and together they held the room's attention until Corbin, denied the scene he had come for, withdrew with a bow that fooled no one paying close attention. Harriet had been paying close attention. She noted with the same cold arithmetic she had once applied to her father's tradesmen's bills that Corbin had said a great deal and proven nothing at all. A man so confident of his claim, she thought, would not need to raise it in a ballroom instead of a magistrate's office. Frederick told her the rest of it in the carriage home, grim-faced, as though the telling cost him something. Silas Corbin's own father had been a wool merchant, ruined decades earlier when Edmund Brantwell's father exposed a shipment of short-weighted bales before the whole of the exchange, ending the elder Corbin's credit and within the year, his life. Silas had spent 30 years rebuilding a fortune for the sole purpose of doing to the Brantwells what had been done to him, and Edmund's weakness at the tables had finally handed him the instrument he needed.
My father never told me any of that. He never told me why Corbin circled us like he did.
I doubt your father remembers it at all. It was his own father's doing a generation removed. Corbin has waited a very long time to collect a debt that was never truly yours to owe.
If Corbin could not win the room, Harriet would learn within the week that he was prepared to try a darker way of winning her back. 3 evenings later, returning alone from the corner shop where she had gone, against Frederick's express wish, to buy thread for a torn hem, Harriet found her path into the Mews blocked by 2 men she did not recognize and had no need to. She did not scream first. She swung the small basket she carried hard into the nearer man's face and used the moment he staggered to seize the iron gate latch beside her and drive it into his shoulder before he could close the distance again. It bought her seconds, not safety. The second man caught her wrist, hard enough to bruise, and dragged her toward a waiting cart before she could find her footing again on the frozen cobblestones. She twisted, kicked at his shin with everything her narrow boot could deliver, and heard him swear in a voice that belonged to no street she knew. Only the sound of Frederick's own boots on the cobblestones, and the fury in his voice as he closed the distance at a dead run, made the men release her and scatter into the dark before a blow could land. He caught the slower of the 2 by the collar, and the blow he landed then was neither measured nor ducal in the slightest. Frederick's knuckles were split from the one man he did manage to catch. Harriet's wrist ached for days after. Neither of them spoke of it, walking back to the house with her hand held in his as anything but what it was, an attack that Corbin had sent and very nearly won. That night, in the library again, with Harriet's wrist wrapped in linen by Frederick's own careful hands, she watched him work in silence for a long moment. Then, without softness this time, She asked him to tell her the truth of what her brother had done, and why it bound him to her so completely that he would risk his own household safety rather than let her go. Frederick set the last of the linen aside and did not look up at once, as though the words required him to find them somewhere other than her face.
Julian Brantwell died at Waterloo, pulling Robert out from beneath a collapsed gun carriage in the last minutes of the battle, when the field was already quiet enough that neither of them should have still been in danger. Robert lived, your brother did not.
The fire popped once in the silence that followed, and Harriet found she could not look away from the small, careful knot he had tied in the linen at her wrist.
I have spent a year unable to look at my own brother's face in that portrait without thinking of the man who was not standing beside him because of what he did. When I saw your father's ruin and Corbin circling it, I told myself I was repaying a debt, nothing more. I did not tell you that because I did not want to be a debt you were forced to accept. I wanted, God help me, to be chosen for something other than what I owed you.
Harriet had expected, if the truth ever came, to feel grateful. What she felt instead was a raw, unexpected anger that startled her more than it startled him.
You would rather I hate you for silence than love you out of pity. Did it never occur to you that I might resent being kept in the dark either way, whatever your reasons?
It occurred to me every day. I chose not to tell you.
And still you chose it. My brother is dead because he would not leave a man behind, and you repaid that by leaving me in the same place I had always stood, guessing for weeks.
She left him standing in the library with the truth spoken at last, and nothing settled by it. And for 3 days afterward, the house held a silence heavier than any before it. Harriet took her meals in her own rooms, and spent the long hours between them reading Julian's letters from the desk drawer Frederick had, without a word left unlocked for her. In the 4th letter she found a line she had somehow missed on the first reading, her brother writing that if anything ever happened to him, Robert Vane was to see that his sister never wanted for a champion, whatever form that champion took. Frederick, for his part, came twice to the door of her rooms and turned away before knocking. The 3rd time, on the 2nd night, he knocked in earnest, and Harriet opened the door only far enough to see his face, unshaven and unslept, before either of them found anything worth saying.
I have not come to ask forgiveness. I know I have not earned it yet.
Then why did you come?
Because the house has gone too quiet without your arguing in it, and I found I would rather be told I'm wrong than not be spoken to at all.
She kept the door where it was, neither wider nor shut, and he took that, rightly, as the only answer she was willing to give him that night, and went back down the corridor to rooms that Mrs. Averill would later confirm had not seen a full night's sleep in 3 days. Corbin, watching the household from whatever distance men like him watch from, read the silence between them as the weakness it resembled, and moved to end the matter before it could mend. He returned to the same card room in St. James's where the original wager had been made, and summoned half of fashionable London to witness it. He brought with him a document he swore had been drawn up before that final hand was ever dealt, a prior claim on Edmund Brantwell's debts, he said, that made Frederick's victory worthless and Harriet's presence at Halworth House nothing better than theft. Word of it reached Halworth House by messenger within the hour, and Harriet was dressed and in the hall before Frederick had finished reading the note twice.
You're not going to answer for this alone. Whatever silence stood between us 3 days ago, it does not extend to letting that man decide the shape of my life in a room I have not been invited to defend myself in.
I would not have asked you to stay behind even if you had offered.
They rode into London together. The silence between them changed now into something closer to alliance than argument, though neither had yet said the word that would have named it. The card room in St. James's was packed to its paneled walls by the time they arrived, gentlemen 3 deep around the very table where the original hand had been dealt. Corbin's document was already passing from hand to hand among them, its dates and figures reading on the surface exactly as damning as he intended. Harriet asked to see it before another word was spoken, and the room, unused to a woman demanding evidence rather than weeping over it, went quiet enough to hear the fire settle in the grate. She had spent 11 months matching her father's chaotic hand against tradesmen's ledgers, learning every trick a desperate man uses to hide a debt from his own daughter. She found Corbin's trick within a minute. A single figure altered, the ink darker than the rest of the page, in a debt forged to predate the wager by the number of days needed to make the claim work.
This figure was written over another, and not recently. Anyone in this room with a steady hand and a magnifying glass may confirm it. My father was ruined by real debts, Mr. Corbin, but this particular one is your invention, drawn up after the fact to steal what you could not win by fair means.
Corbin's smile faltered at last, and he began speaking quickly, insisting the figure had always read that way, that a woman untrained in matters of finance could hardly be trusted to read a gentleman's ledger correctly. For one uncertain moment, the room seemed almost willing to believe him, simply because he said it with such practiced confidence, and Harriet felt the tide of a dozen watching gentlemen tilt, however slightly, back toward the man who had spent 30 years learning how to sound honest.
Then let a steadier hand than mine confirm it. I have no fear of being proven wrong, Mr. Corbin. I notice you have not yet offered the same.
A gray-haired solicitor near the window, hearing that, asked whether he might examine the page himself, and the room's attention shifted away from Corbin's protests toward the paper in his hand. He held it to the candlelight for a long moment, turned it once, and said, in the flat and unhurried voice of a man accustomed to being believed, that the young lady was entirely correct, and that he had seldom seen an alteration so poorly concealed. The room that had gathered to watch a duke humiliated turned, instead, to watch a moneylender's carefully built claim come apart in the hands of the very woman he had tried to use it against. Corbin's protests grew louder and less convincing with every sentence. Within the hour, 2 gentlemen present with legal standing had agreed to examine the ledger properly, a promise that would end, in the weeks that followed, with Corbin's reputation and his business both in ruins of his own making. Frederick said nothing throughout it. None of it required words from him. He stood beside Harriet the entire time, close enough that anyone watching could see exactly whose side he had chosen, and let her win the room herself, because it had never truly been his fight to win for her. It was only afterward, in the carriage home, with St. James's behind them and the debt dead at last, that he spoke again.
I watched you dismantle a man twice your age and considerably more practiced at deception, in front of half of London, without once raising your voice. I have been trying since that morning on your father's doorstep to decide what I intended to do with you. I find I no longer have any excuse for silence.
Then stop making excuses, Your Grace, and say the thing plainly.
I do not want you because of what your brother did for mine. I have not, for some weeks now, been able to remember that debt at all when you're in the room. I want you because you're the only person who has ever made me feel like a man being chosen, rather than a name being endured.
It bore no resemblance to a grand speech delivered on bended knee in a crowded ballroom, the way such declarations were meant to happen in every story Harriet had ever been told as a girl. It was said quietly, in a moving carriage, by a man who had spent a year unable to say anything at all. Harriet found that she preferred it this way.
I was staked at a card table without ever being asked. I will not be claimed the same way twice, even kindly. If you want me, Frederick Vane, you may ask me properly, and wait to hear whether I say yes.
Harriet Brantwell, will you stay at Halworth House? Not as a debt collected, but as the woman I'm asking, plainly and for the first time, to choose me back?
She let a long moment pass before answering at all. She let him wait exactly as long as she had once been left waiting on her own doorstep, wondering what a silent man intended, and found, when she finally answered, that the waiting had been worth it to both of them.
Yes, on the condition that you never again decide my future before telling me what it is.
If the truth has ever reached you late, and it turned out kinder than the silence that came before it, I'd like to hear about it in the comments. I still think silence is the costlier choice, most days. Halworth House, in the months that followed, earned at last the description Mrs. Averill had given it that very first night. A place where Harriet Brantwell wanted for nothing, least of all an honest answer, freely given, to the question that had once been asked of her by a duke who no longer needed silence to protect himself from being known. Robert Vane's portrait still hung in the west corridor when spring came to Halworth House, and Frederick no longer stopped before it the way he once had, alone and unable to speak a single word to it. Now Harriet stood beside him instead, her hand resting easily in the crook of his arm, and the silence between them held nothing that needed hiding anymore, only the ordinary quiet of two people who no longer had to guess at each other. Mrs. Averill liked to say to anyone who would listen that the house had finally learned to breathe again after a long-held winter. Harriet thought, in a way she kept to herself, that it was true of more than the house alone. Though she never said so aloud, some things she had learned were better kept as a private certainty than spoken into the world to be examined.